So a bit of some rocky logistics today, but thank you for bearing with us. There are a few people, including our final speaker of the evening, Corey Forsyth, who are stuck in the elevator. And the building is working on freeing them. So all of you who are, thanks Lee, all of you who are here in your seat are a step ahead tonight. So things are rocking and rolling in Emberland. For those of you who aren't aware, we had a great conference last week in Boston, Wicked Good Ember. That was a really cool spot. Just by show of hands, who was able to make it up here? So cool. Probably looks like 5 or 6, 7 people. Some great talks, great atmosphere, a lot of fun. Tonight we've got an awesome lineup for you. We've got 3 lightning talks. We're going to be looking at a variety of things, including a demo, some kind of in-the-weeds decisions about where code goes, and some other good stuff. And then we're going to debut a new library called Torii that makes authentication with Ember easy. And then we're going to have a talk about Ember Mixins and how to leverage them for fun and profit. I want to mention that the next meetup, July, is going to be Thursday, July 24th. I'm looking for speakers for that event, so if you have an interest in sharing with the group, definitely get in touch. And I also want to thank our sponsors. We've got 3 venue sponsors who have been incredible. The first is where we are today, Pivotal Labs. Elevator issues notwithstanding, they've been fantastic. The pizza and drinks is thanks to Pivotal, and Pivotal has been our host now at Ember NYC for over 2 years, which is great. For people who don't know, Pivotal is an agile consulting shop. Do lots of iOS, Rails, JavaScript work, and if you are either looking for somebody to hire to kind of help get a startup off the ground, or you are looking for a job as a consultant working in an environment that's heavily agile, lots of pair programming and stuff, I would encourage you to get in touch with somebody here. A great person is my brother-in-law, Micah Young, who works here. So that's Pivotal. Our other sponsors that I want to thank include Simple Reach and Movable Ink. Simple Reach and Movable Ink are both sponsors of our Hacker Hours events. And for those of you who have never been, Hacker Hours are our smaller, more intimate versions of these events. We do 2 a month, and whereas these events are really about having a talk or a set of talks from the front of the room. We want to also have some events where there's an opportunity for real mentorship, real hands-on learning, and that's what Hacker Hours is meant for. So with those announcements, I want to just open it up to the floor for anybody who is hiring, looking to get hired, other events that folks in the group might be interested in. Anybody have announcements? Let me run the mic over.
Hey everyone. So I wasn't expecting actually this kind of opportunity, but I'll jump on it. I work at a company called Eponym in Williamsburg. We're platform commerce for eyewear. So we help fashion brands, independent and mid-sized fashion brands, manufacture and release and sell their own eyewear online. And we also have kind of an agency component. So we're building out websites for the stores that sell the eyewear for the brands that we partner with. So we have lots of great front end work. We're considering using Ember for sort of the next generation of our front end, which is why I'm here, as well as to meet people. So if that sounds cool to you, introduce yourself to me afterwards. My name is Paul. That's it, basically. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paul. Anybody else? If anything, want to share? Going once, twice. Okay, well, we have one other special announcement. For those of you who follow Ember NYC on Twitter, hold on, I'm texting the guy, texting the folks in the elevator. Give me 1 second. For those of you who follow Ember NYC on Twitter, you may have seen this tweet. I don't know if people can see that. We'll zoom in a little. So, to reveal the mystery here, I would like to invite Mateen and Jeff from Plyf up, and I think that you're going to like what they've got to say.
Maybe not. For Paul, my buddies at Gin Lane are actually doing their latest projects on Ember. Yeah, and so they build a lot of e-commerce experiences for brands as well. I can put you in contact with them too. Okay, cool. So Mateen, Aini, thanks for this opportunity. So last time I was here, I talked about, you know, we're hiring, we're doing this, we're moving over from Backbone to Ember. I got a round of applause from everybody in the room. Not another round of applause. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And since then, you know, we've been working with Luke and team, and you know, building Plyf using Ember CLI and some other cool new, very forward-thinking frameworks, and we've hired a few folks, and so I actually really love this community. I'm very fond of this community, and as a part of it, last week or a week and a half ago, we were in Boston, and I didn't realize how ambitious the community was with regards to, you know, what we're trying to build together as a sort of a collective. Regardless of the things that we're doing individually, collectively we're trying to like progress, I guess, digital, if you will. And that being said, we're kind of like kicking things back and forth. I think there's some people in town. And so what we wanted to do was, you know, with that sense of community in mind, do something out in Quag and call it Ember Out East. And what Ember Out East is going to be, it's going to be a hacking, networking, learning, and fun experience. It's not going to be formal talks. It's going to be a beachy unconference where 40 to 50 of us will come together. The only real, I guess, guideline is that, you know, we prefer developers to come along to the hackathon. Transportation, everything will be included. There's a website for all of this, and it's going to be awesome. So we're hoping that people will join. Thank you.
Cool. Jeff, you want to add anything to this?
So I'm Jeff Arbor. I'm Mateen's co-founder, and I just wanted to take a chance to kind of explain what we're trying to do. You know, the goal of this event is just to bring a bunch of people together in a really casual, beautiful environment, kind of get away from the traditional conferences of talks and lectures and agendas and schedules, and just get a bunch of us together to sort of think about what we're doing individually and how we can work together collectively to continue to push the Ember framework forward. We're going to be doing this in Quag, in this absolutely gorgeous estate that we have no right being in. So if you like the beach, if you like sun, if you just want to come and hang out with all of us, I highly recommend that you join us. We're going to get some great food. We're going to get some entertainment. There's going to be activities. There's tennis. There's swimming. There's sunshine. There's cricket, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of you know, great interactions with other people in the community. So the goal is to get everyone out east. We're gonna shuttle everyone out from New York. We've got a great bus to kick things off. We're gonna end up at this beautiful estate in Quag, where we're just gonna kind of let things happen as they do, and let people kind of come together in this really casual, beautiful environment to collaborate and communicate and continue to push things forward. So we hope to have each and every one of you there. Space is somewhat limited. It will be all inclusive. So we're gonna get you guys out there. We're gonna eat. We're gonna feed you. We're going to put you up. We're going to have some good times and hopefully make some great memories as well as some great lasting friendships.
Cool. So I told Jeff and Mateen that I suspected that we were going to have a lot more than 40 people who are interested. So we're doing a lottery system to try to keep it equitable. We are sending a few invitations to a few key folks in the community, in particular members of the Ember core team who are going to be here in New York for their face-to-face the Saturday and Sunday immediately before this Monday and Tuesday anyway. So I know that at least Robert Jackson and Steph Penner and Chris Selden will be out, and hopefully a few more folks from the team. So I see from my phone that some of you have already went to the bit.ly link and submitted, so that's awesome. For those of you who didn't see it, it's bit.ly/ember-out-east. And I will put this up on Twitter, and we're going to send something out to the Ember NYC mailing list as well. So I'm super stoked about this. This went from like being just an idea, like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if, to actually happening, and I'm stoked. So speaking of being excited, let's get into tonight's talks. Our first speaker is going to talk about a pretty awesome kind of dashboard app that he made for a security company called Firefly. And I'm pleased to welcome Edgar Calderon. Testing, whoa. Testing 1 2 1 2. Testing 1 2. All right.
Hello. This feels great. Can you hear me? Cool. Thanks. Cool. So, hi everyone. My name is Edgar. I work for a security company called Mandiant, which is now a division of FireEye. We got acquired back in December. And just as a little background, Mandiant is the company that actually published a security report on like Chinese companies hacking the government and all the US companies. So that's how they got really popular. And yeah, so before we got acquired, we started building this cloud project called the Threat Analytics. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience building the UI side of this application, which is built on Ember, of course. Just a little background, I used to work at Boxy, where I built the web app as well in Ember back on the 9.9x days. When men were real men, you know. Yeah, so the application is called TAP, Threat Analytics Platform, and it's basically a security incident detection and response workflow. So basically, we want to help companies identify like cyber threats whenever that happens, and give them like a workflow they should follow, how to act, and what steps to take around that. And just give them the tools so they can like analyze things and understand when things are real or when things might be false positives and things like that. So this is just a little picture of the dashboard. I'll try to show a demo if I can. But basically, the big picture is this is how it works. It's following a microservice architecture. Everything is on the cloud. We build this on Amazon. So for each customer, we have a VPC where we deploy like all these different components. Being like the UI is just one of them, right? So we use Elasticsearch, MongoDB, a bunch of other stuff I'm going to show next. But yeah, basically, the first approach was we wanted to make the UI just another service like the rest of the architecture that gets deployed every time. So that's one of the first challenges that we have, that for every customer we have to deploy one UI. Now we're moving to a multi-tenant platform, but still we need to be able to support, like, if some companies don't want to go to the cloud, so we need to be able to deploy into their infrastructures, similar to how GitHub Enterprise does it. A little bit about the stack. We do a lot of things on Node. For the UI, Ember and D3, it's most of the stuff. We use Mongo, Elasticsearch, ZeroMQ, Ansible, and TeamCity. Those are like the main things that we use across the stack. And one of the things that Luke asked me to think about is, like, what do you want people to get out of this talk? And one of the things that I found it was interesting is how, like, in such a short timeline, we were able to build this app, use me and another guy, Kevin, and kind of like deal with requirements and changes and like the design changing all the time and all that. But like not having to worry about like all the things that the framework does pretty well already, and just focus on the application logic. Some of the facts that we're having on the application, we don't use Ember data. Maybe in the future, not right now. Of course, the Ember CLI is still pretty early, but it's quite interesting. I started looking already into it, kind of migrated a small part of the project, get familiar with it, and it works pretty well. We are using query params since the beginning, and although our use case is pretty simple, it's been working fine. Right now, we're just stuck on a beta version because they're not supported anymore, but that's fine. We try to run all the beta and canary builds, so that's been good so far. And we have our own build process, which follows the Ember app kit and some other stuff that we need to do. And we use feature flags, and this is interesting because we need to integrate with different services within the company, and depending on the kind of product that the client has, it comes with different integrations. But again, this is really simple to tackle on the UI aspect, and we use that a lot. And yeah, one of the things that pretty much in all the sections that we have, for instance, pagination, it's really easy to like reuse that functionality across all the sections, just abstracting things into Mixins, which I think there's going to be a talk specifically for that. And we use a lot of components through the app, right? And that's one of the best things, how components work on the framework, that we are able to reuse most of these things really easily and without like having to do much effort. And some of the lessons learned that we get during this project is like really easy to put code in the wrong places. And this might be due like when you're getting familiar, right? But for instance, like the actions, you can put actions on the view layer, on the controller, on the route. And when you're starting things, it makes sense to put them in one or the other. But it's until you start testing and refactoring that you realize, oh shit, this should work this way or this other way. Other thing, the file structure conventions. Now that I started moving to or testing the Ember CLI, I used to put like small views that are from the same module. If it was less than like 10 lines, put them all together. Now that I started migrating, it was kind of like a pain realizing, oh, okay, now every file should be on its own, every view, etc. Mixin and helpers, I think they're a pretty important part to embrace, and they make your life very easy. Log everything, analyze everything. We use mixed panel and Sentry. For us, it's very important to be able to understand like different behaviors from different customers. If there's something weird, especially with the data coming in, it's not always the same, and things change, and sometimes you assume incorrect things, but until you get that error, and Sentry is pretty good at that. And yeah, so we get we can create custom reports and be able to understand, okay, when we created this version, we started seeing some types of events on these environments and things like that. On the testing part, at the beginning it was kind of like difficult, right? The documentation wasn't as good as it is right now. So I started doing this in Mocha and on my own way. But after looking at all the community efforts like Ember QUnit and all the examples being like using Sign-on.js and Rosie, so it was pretty easy to like leverage that and just migrate everything. So now we have a pretty good like test coverage that we can test like any new like canary reveal and make sure, feel confident that it's not going to break anything and use it in production. I'm just going to try to show you a small demo. Can you see that? Yeah, so this is pretty much the application. This is the main thing, which is the dashboard that tells you a little bit about like if there are any alerts that you should know about, understand what's going on. And this little like graph at the bottom, it tells you like all the types of events that you're getting. And right now I'm using fixture data, so there's nothing there. But this share, for instance, is a component that gets reused in this other section of the app when you go to alerts. So it's pretty simple to reuse that. Almost all the sections have like some filters, pagination, search across like alerts, incidents, rules. So abstracting that functionality as well was pretty good and be able to reuse all that. And one of the main things about this is the search capability, because we are like searching across billions of records in few seconds, right? So like the search experience is kind of like the key part of this, being able to read all these logs coming on from the server, kind of like toggles if you want to see certain type of data, you want to do selections, export things, parse, filtering, and like the framework makes really simple to use to do all this. And yeah, this is pretty much what I got. Cool. Thanks.
Take a couple of questions for Edgar. Ali, are you ready to get set up, or do you want to go third? Okay, Mike, why don't you get set up then? Questions for Edgar.
I was just wondering, what was the select to thing that you were testing?
The select to? Oh, it's the drop-down component. It's a plugin, right?
Okay.
So basically, oh yeah. So we just grab that as Ember components, like jQuery plugins and all that, and so all our selects, for instance, now they are automatically select to, and we can do like filtering and and most important the look and feel, which our designers were pretty like demanding about that.
Cool. Yeah, your app looks pretty awesome.
Thanks.
Hi, I was just wondering, you mentioned you learned some lessons on where to place things, and do you have any advice for where things end up or how you structure things now architecturally?
From now on, I will just follow the Ember CLI conventions. I mean, they're pretty helpful, right? And they're being defined by the core people that are working on Ember. So I'm trying to align pretty much everything to how they're doing things, so that when I migrate this app, it's going to be easier. Because just like the files itself, I have to rewrite so many files, and like it's kind of like messy right now. So yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Edgar. Appreciate it.
I'll get you on that.
What I didn't mention, thanks. Here you go, Michael. What I didn't mention up front is that after the talks that I mentioned, we're going to go to a nearby establishment where hopefully the speakers can make it out as well, and you can ask some more questions. So while our next speaker gets set up, for the folks that were stuck in the elevator, first of all, welcome, and I'm sorry. Second of all, you missed a big announcement, which I want to share with you, because honestly, that elevator, when I saw the people come out, that elevator was like the heart of Ember NYC. That would have been like a real tragedy if that elevator had never opened. Not just for the world, but for Ember. So anyway, we are doing a 2-day hack fest in the Hamptons. It's going to be by lottery, and I would love for you all to be there, so we'll tweet the details. All right, our next speaker is a good friend of mine, and is going to talk about something that if you have written an Ember app, you have asked yourself this question, guaranteed. The question is, where should I put this little bit of Ember presentation logic? Where does it belong? So I don't want to steal his thunder. I'm just going to hand it over to Michael Madrid.
Okay, thank you, Luke, and thank you for saying little piece of Ember presentation logic, because presentation logic could really be a big thing, and I was worried the title kind of overpromised, and here I was going to underdeliver. Okay, so if I can figure this out. Oh, present. Okay, yes, Pretzi. Okay, so where should my Ember presentation logic go? So, as I said, I'm going to kind of limit this. I'm just going to be talking really about simple dynamic text, like things like dates, no behavior, actions type of thing. And the example I'll be doing is date expressions with something called Moment.js, which even if you haven't used Ember, you may have used, and if you haven't used, is a pretty useful JavaScript package. Specifically, what we are going to try to do here is display a posted at date and use the ago format, as I've named it. I don't know if that's a formal term. If it's less than 2 days ago, so for instance, if it was 10 minutes ago, it'll say 10 minutes ago instead of whatever that would be. The model we're going to have here, one thing also I should mention is that this will be done in the ES6 modules style. I pretty much do everything now with Ember CLI. You guys probably should too if you can. If you haven't, just the one thing is the name of the object really comes from the file name as opposed to being some name on the global app object. So in this case, we have an if you look over here, we have app models post, which means this is a post model. Okay, and as you can see, this has a title, a body, and a posted at field. Pretty standard. Moment.js allows you to do things like take a date. Here we have a date, which is today at 12 o'clock. And okay, good, you can see that. And this will format it according to this format. The ago format from now, if this were at 7 o'clock, this would say 7 hours ago because that would have been noon. Okay, and our question is, where do we put our Moment.js code or code like this? Now, Ember, as for those of you starting out, maybe has a daunting array of objects. There are routes, models, controllers, components, as well as things like mixins and helpers. And for this piece of code, when you're starting out, you could credibly think any of these places really, except probably routes. Another thing, if you're coming for something like Rails, with ERB, you can pretty much put any arbitrary Rails expression, which gives you a lot of flexibility as to what you can do in your templates. Ember uses handlebars, which doesn't allow you nearly so much leeway. So you have to put the code somewhere else. So the easiest place to put something is probably a controller. So here we have our post controller, and I'm sorry, I forgot the name of that. That would be under app controllers post. And we have this formatted posted at property, which here we have moment is constructing a moment date. We have this cutoff, which I talked about. I'm saying for this cutoff, subtract 24 hours from right now, and if the posted date is greater than the cutoff, then give the date as a in from now form, and if not, give it in a date time form. And I guess we could just, I mean, you should probably understand how that works, but where to, oops. So this would just be something like this. This is not, this is a Ember blogging app, which I'll mention a little later. So if you see the first post, it's 3 hours ago. Everything else has a different format. Okay. Okay. Yes. Oh, and in your template, as you'll see down here, you just call your formatted posted at date just like this. So on the template side, very simple. There are a couple drawbacks to using a controller like this. This formatted posted at will only be available in this in the template where this controller is decorating the model. We probably will have other pages. We might have you know, an index page, and then from that page go to an individual post. So right there we have 2 places where we want to have this posted date. And if we're doing like this, we're going to have to rewrite code in 2 different places, which generally isn't a good idea. Oops, sorry. And also, if we have more than one date, we might have a created at date and our updated dates in the same controller. We would have to rewrite those somehow too. So we're going to have kind of an explosion of properties across controllers and even maybe in the same controller. So one thing we might consider is doing a mix-in, which Edgar also mentioned. A mix-in will allow you to put this code in various different controllers, so that would potentially solve one problem. Some of the drawbacks here is we have to have an import statement, and we have to say that, oh, sorry, down here, we would have to include this posted date mix-in in all of our controllers, so a little extra work. And it still wouldn't solve our other problem that we might have multiple properties in one model with more than one date, where we wanted this functionality. So another thing we might consider, well, you know, a model is going to have this functionality. You know, wherever we're using this model, we could potentially, if we do this in the model, it'll be there. Don't have to worry about controllers. Don't have to worry about mix-ins. That solves our one problem, but we still have the other problem that maybe this model has more than one date, and we're going to still have that explosion of properties. So model is probably not the greatest place for this either. And another thing which we haven't really talked about at all, sorry, am I talking loud enough? Everything's good? Okay, sorry. Another issue is configurability. If we're trying to configure things, if we're doing this in like a model or a controller, we're probably going to have to write other properties, and one for each of our different dates where we are specifying things. So in addition to the explosion of just that function itself, we might have to have an explosion of properties too. So for highly configurable things, this might not be the best solution. Luckily, Ember has thought of this, and there are 2 constructs which are very well suited to these type of needs, and those are handlebar helpers and components, which I will discuss briefly. Handlebar helpers, these are things which you can define and then use them in a view, kind of like a tag. It looks a little bit, I guess, like a function, like an ERB function, if you were to define something, maybe in a Rails helper or something. You define it as thus. It would be under Ember helpers, date time. So, oops. So this says date time helper. So that would be, this would actually have to be date time dash helper if it were to be like this. But the name, it comes from the file name, as mentioned. Let's see. So this is basically the same functionality we had before. As you can see, this helper takes two parameters, the first one being the date. So here, when we call this in our template, posted at would be the date, and the format would be the format. And if we wanted to include other things, we could just have more parameters passed. Okay. And finally, the other thing, an Ember component. Can everyone see the code? Okay. Okay. We'll just talk a little bit about components first. When you an Ember component, it's modeled on an HTML component, HTML5 component, which you guys may have heard about or read about a little. When you write these, the output of one of these is an HTML element. When you're passing properties to this, as we saw in the helper, you're passing just parameters. Here, you're actually binding properties, and we'll take a look at the code again after we go through this. All components have two parts. One is the JavaScript code, and the other is actually a template itself. And also, components allow you to capture events and throw events, but we're not going to discuss that here. So going back to the code, so at the top, we have the JavaScript part of the code. As you can see, there's a tag name, which is span, so this will produce a span component. We have a format, and we have an ago hours, which I'm using in the ago cutoff. So over here, you'll see that anything which is more than 24 hours from now, from date now, will be in the ago format, whereas other things will be in more of a date format. Okay, and the output will be this formatted date, which is which has the code in the controller here and will be computed based on the date. And probably I should say those other properties too, like ago hours, that's potentially configurable, and format is also configurable. So those should be in property 2. In your this component HBS tells what the component should output, and in your regular handlebars in your on your page or your template, you would call the component as date time, and you would pass it the date, which would be posted at, and the format, and you could pass it ago hours. Maybe you want it to be 2 days instead of 1 day, then you could pass that as 48 hours instead of 24. So very, very flexible, very easy to write. Okay, we did that. Components versus helpers. In general, you would prefer components when, as the set of properties gets larger and larger, it's not, when you're just passing parameters, you know, in regular programming languages with functions, this is an issue too. If you have a list of like 20 different parameters to your function call, and some of them might appear in some circumstances and others might not, that is generally going to be a problem and could cause issues and confusion. So it's better to pass in properties actually bound to something or with some name in a hash type, options type, hash type thing. So that would be something where components are preferred. There actually is a way to pass in properties with components, but it's a little more, with helpers, but it's a little more complicated to write. And also, if you have any complex templating, obviously component has that templating element there, so you can do that sort of thing there, which definitely, so that would definitely be a reason to use components over helpers if that was the case. But if it's just a very simple thing, text string, maybe no HTML or very little, then you might consider a helper. Okay, so just in sum, if you just have something page specific and it's really not generic, it's not all that configurable, you might just throw it in the controller. If you have, say, a greeting on your main page and that's the only place you have a greeting, perfectly fine to do that. If you had really a canonical representation where the representation of this model property is it's almost part of the business logic, then I could see putting that on a model. I couldn't really think of a good example. Maybe some of you can think of one. So I don't think it's a case you're going to have a lot. But if that were the case, then sure, why not? But if you want more generic configurable elements, which you can use all over the place, then definitely think helpers or components. Anyone else have opinions on these things? Or no? Okay, good. Oh, sure.
If you said one of the options was putting it in the controller, what's the argument for putting it in the controller versus putting it in the view?
In a view, okay. Yeah. I don't think views are used all that much anymore. So in general, you probably would just put it in a controller. Ember components do inherit from views. I think the issues would be the same. If you have a view, it's kind of just one page. It's attached to that one component, or that one, you could be doing a render of a bunch of things, but it's just that one little part of the page.
Right.
So controller versus view, view generally, you can do more things with events and stuff like that. So for something like this, I would just throw it in a controller and not worry about a view.
Okay.
But the issues, views versus the other things we talked about, are going to be pretty much the same.
Cool. All right, time for one more question for Michael.
What about using computed properties instead of the other options that you were given?
Well, in most of these things, that format was a computed property. What do you mean?
Like a CP macro.
A what?
Like a reusable computed property, where you extract it to a macro, sort of like Ember computed alias or Ember computed.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess you could do that. I usually almost never do that, but yeah, that's
yet another option for you.
Yet another option. Yeah, that's probably valid. Yeah.
Cool. All right, let's give Michael a hand.
Oh,
Thanks.
just one last thing.
Hold that applause.
If you want to see more of an example on this, I do have a GitHub repository, this mblog. It's a blog written in Ember. It uses Ember CLI and also uses Ember Simple Auth, which might get a little mention in Matt's talk later. So if you're interested in both Moment.js and the other things, you can look at that. Okay.
Now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. All right. Our next speaker, his presentation is so incredible that we need 2 computers to present it. Actually, we were having a little AV trouble with our next speaker's machine, so we may need 2 computers. Our next speaker is going to talk about doing some crazy stuff with Ember data adapters that result in what he calls self-defining apps. So I'll turn it over to Ollie.
Right. Okay, can you hear me? We good? We can hear me? Any better? Hooray! Right. Hi, my name's Ollie, Ollie Griffiths. I've been doing back-end, front-end, JavaScript, mobile for a little while. And I just started doing Ember maybe 2 months ago with a plan to just try and convert an existing app into an Ember app and see how I got on. The main problem that I encountered was where my app was getting data from. And it's a kind of a unique scenario where there's no REST API available. There's technically no routes available. When I'm building the app, I have no idea what any of the routes are, which causes problems because Ember has this root-first philosophy. So I kind of set about trying to work out a way to handle that. So the first thing that I needed to do was build a custom Ember data adapter. Has anyone here done that? see like 4 hands. Right, so basically, the custom Ember data adapters, what do? The basic premise behind the Ember data custom adapters is to make an interface between the Ember data identity mapper, which is basically like your local store of data that's stored in memory at runtime, and some external data store somewhere in the sky. Or it could be local, it could be anywhere. You don't know, you don't really care. You just want something to go away and handle all that stuff for you. So it basically provides methods to find, create, update, and delete records in whatever external data store you might have. And that data store could be a REST API, it could be a SOAP API, it could be an RSS feed, it could be local storage, doesn't really matter. From your app's context, you don't really care. You just want that stuff to go away and happen. Now, Ember provides certain adapters out of the box. It provides a REST adapter, which is for working with REST APIs. It provides a fixture adapter, which is used for populating in-memory data, often used for like testing whilst you're kind of building your app when you don't have an API. And the third one is the active model adapter, which is primarily used for dealing with Rails applications and uses the same patterns and stuff. So the last one that we've got here is a custom adapter. And the custom adapter, you can build that and extend that off any of these 3 adapters that already exist in the system, or you can roll your own, basing it off the Ember data adapter. So, as I mentioned before, there are certain methods that you have to supply. Namely, those are just find, create, update, and delete, which anybody that's ever done any kind of server-side development will be pretty familiar with those kind of terms. So there's a find method, which finds either a single item or multiple items, depending upon whether or not, that should actually say ID, not URL there, depending upon whether or not you're supplying an ID. Then you've got find all, which effectively that find method delegates to if you don't supply an ID, and that just returns all methods from the store. Find query allows you to query your remote store, your external data store, by some parameters. Now, that logic is left up to you as to how you're going to actually do that querying. The querying may be done server-side within your actual REST API, or if you're doing, say, storage within local storage, you might decide to do that filtering locally. And you can configure that within the adapter yourself. Then create record, update record, and delete record. They're all pretty self-explanatory. So this is a comments stripped out of the REST adapter, which just kind of demonstrates some of the basic principles behind building your own adapter. Now, with the REST adapter, you're making an AJAX request with every call that you make to the adapter. So you're either doing a GET request to fetch records, or you're going to be doing a post, put, or delete to update, create, delete records. So here we've got the find method. There's a method built into the REST adapter to build the URL that you're going to be requesting the data for. And it's all based on naming conventions. So if you have products, the default REST adapter is going to look for /products.json. If you've got an article, it's going to look for /articles. And you can override that build URL method if your URL structure for your REST adapter is slightly different. So that's the find method. The find all, as I mentioned before, does a similar kind of thing, except that's going to return a set of data. Ember will keep track of a since token, so it knows when it last requested that. So if you care about throttling your API and only submitting requests after a certain timeout, you can go ahead and do that. The find query, again, the REST adapter will basically construct the query parameters that you pass through to find query as a query string, because it's a REST API. Create record, update record, and delete record. Basically what's happening here in each one of these methods is we're taking the data, so the record that you're trying to save, which is the third parameter, and converting that into a string. Because ultimately when you're sending data to a server, you can't send an object, you've got to send a string. So each adapter can have an optional serializer, and basically the job of the serializer is to take the raw object that you're trying to persist and convert it into a string. So in the case of the JSON, in the case of a REST adapter, the default serializer is JSON serializer. If you had a server that only accepted form URL encoded, you could swap that out and change that. Then, as you can see here, we've got return this Ajax build URL, and we're doing a post for the create record. We're doing a put for the update record, and we're doing a delete for the delete record. Should all be relatively self-explanatory. Now, so the job of the adapter is not to store the data. It's purely there to provide a transport mechanism to convert the data in your local data store to your external data store, whatever that might be. And as I mentioned before, the serializers are used to convert the data from the local storage format into your remote storage format. Now, in the application that I've been building, it's kind of a unique application in that there's technically no API. There's another system sitting between the Ember application and the actual website itself. And basically what that layer does is it provides you, via a configuration that you basically write in like a JSON-style format, you can define CSS selectors, and it'll go through the source page, run those selectors against the page, and build you up a JavaScript object with the data that those selectors are matching. So I needed a way to be able to delve into that data store, pull the data out, and get it into my Ember application in a way that the only interfacing that I was doing with that API was in one place. So I built a custom Ember data adapter and an entity resolver, and the entity resolver is designed to just go away and actually find that data, pull it in, and make it available to the adapter, and then the adapter just delegates calls out to that. So in the same way that the REST adapter is delegating a call to this.ajax, which is ultimately going off through jQuery, instead of it going out through jQuery, I wrote like a bridge, which I termed the entity resolver, which would go away, talk to this third-party API, and pull the data out, make it available to my app. So that's all well and good. I can get the data into the app. The problem I then had was, how do I transition to different routes? Because Ember is built on the premise that you know what the routes are when you're building your app. I didn't know what the routes are, and this system is going to be applied to hundreds of different websites, and there's no way that I could know the URLs for all of those different websites and bake them into my app. That's just not possible. So I was thinking, there must be a way where I can determine what the destination of a route is at runtime. It turns out there actually isn't a native way of doing that and at runtime. There is no provision for doing this in Ember out of the box. So I got a little bit creative. So the question is, like, what is a self-defining app? And I said it's the full functionality of the app is not known at build time. So there's certain things that are only going to be able to be accessible at runtime. Additional app functionality is created at runtime based on external dependencies. And as I said, this data that's coming from the website through this API layer has got certain properties within it. One of those properties defines a type, or in my case, a template. So the data that's coming back is one of two types. It's either a panel or it's an article. So I can use that data at runtime to work out what kind of route I need to transition to. So I've got an article controller and a panel controller, and I need to know which one I'm going to transition to. Thus, the app will build itself whilst it's running. So it's pretty straightforward if you know what your routes are. You've got a pizza route, you've got a pizza controller, you've got a pizza model, and a pizza view, and a pizza template. The problem is, when you don't know what that is, you've got some route, some controller, some model, and some view. Okay, so you have a problem. Everything depends upon your route. Without your routes defined, transitioning to a route is impossible. You can't do it. You need to have a route name of some description. Some websites just don't have patternable routes. There are plenty of WordPress websites out there that just have / the slug of the article, but they also may have tags. So whilst your article might be / my new Ember project.html, you may also have a tag of /javascript.html. Now your server knows what kind of page to render, but if you're trying to write a client-side app for that, and say you can change those URLs to .json and get back the data for that, and it identifies this as an article or as a tag, you need to know what kind of page to display as a result of that response. So how can we handle this? Wildcard routes. Now, if you've used wildcard routes before, you've probably used them for like error handling if somebody puts in a route that doesn't exist within your system. That's pretty much what they're designed for. So you put in / some route that doesn't exist, hit enter, and you have a wildcard route set up. It'll execute that, and you can do whatever you want at that point. You can show an error page, show an alert message, like whatever you want. So they're intended to catch when the user tries to transition to an undefined route and show an error page. But I worked out I could use this functionality to build new routes at runtime, which actually works pretty well. So here's the flow. Step one is in the model hook of the catch-all catch-all route, which is the route that is associated with my wildcard route. I can create a valid route name for that URL that's being transitioned to. And basically all I'm doing there is taking the URL, stripping out /, periods, and hyphens, and converting it using some of the internal Ember string functions to make it into something that Ember is going to be able to work with, a nice clean route name. Then I make an AJAX request to the URL that I'm attempting to transition to. I extract an identifying property from the response. It could be anything, could be type, could be model, depends upon basically what your API is serving back. And then I'm able to register that URL or that path against the new created route name. So now I've got a URL and I've got a route name. Then what I'm able to do is I'm able to create a new route, just in the same way as you would create a route at build time whilst you're actually building your app. I can create one at runtime and associate that URL that I'm trying to transition to with the route name that I've just created. At the same time, because I know the type, because that's come back as part of my API response, I can now set the controller, set the view, and set the template. So when I end up actually transitioning to that route, Ember knows which controller, which view, and which template to actually render, rather than using the default lookup system where it uses the name of the route to find out what template, view, and controller to use. And then I just transition to that newly defined route. So from Ember's point of view, I'm doing a transition. It doesn't know what I'm trying to transition to because I'm using the actual URL rather than the route name. The catch-all route will catch that, create a new route at the same time, and then transition to that new route. So what's this look like? So in our catch-all route, and although I've actually left it off this slides, I'll pull it up in a sec what the actual route definition looks like. But it's just in the same way that you would define your routes. So in your router.map, you're going to call this .route catch-all as the route name, and then /*:, which basically matches any undefined route. So because it's called catch-all, it's going to be using this catch-all route that has been defined here. So when the model is tried to be requested from that route, this is where I'm jumping in and jiggery-pokery things around. So we take the URL, which is available in the transition argument that's passed to this method. We grab the URL out, and we just do a stringify on the URL after replacing the /, periods, etc., with underscores. And that creates an Ember-friendly route name. Then we check to see whether or not that route name is already registered within the application. If I've already transitioned to it before, then I obviously don't need to redo all this work again. So if it is, we just immediately transition to that route. If it's not, we continue on. I'm grabbing my entity resolver, which, as I mentioned before, is this one little piece that talks to this third-party API, this JavaScript API that does the AJAX request and ultimately returns me back some JavaScript object. So via that resolver, we can request the URL. the resolver returns a promise. So once that promise has been fulfilled, we can then, this is where we start getting into the real work of what's going on. So we grab the type attribute from the response, and I'm just, for illustration purposes, calling it model. We check and see if we don't have a root name. The only time that we shouldn't have a root name is if you're trying to go to /, and that's because we're stripping out all slashes from the URL, in which case there's not going to be a root name. So we just set that to be the type that I'm transitioning to. You could set that to be anything. It really doesn't really matter. Then this is where we're now registering we're mapping the root, and we're registering it with Ember. So we've just got a pretty standard router.map. We're mapping the root name to the path with the this.resource. And then this portion, I don't know why I keep pointing at my screen, because none of you can see that. This portion here is where, via the container, if there's a root defined, Ember will use that. Otherwise, it uses its convention-based name lookup system to try and find a root that's available. So we register our root, and this root name is the one that we created earlier. And this format is a format that Ember understands, and you can look up via the container by root : the root name. We're just extending the standard root. We're setting the type for the controller, the view name, and the template name. So in my case, that's either going to be panel or it's going to be article. In the model hook, then I'm just doing doing a little bit of basic identification of what type that I'm looking at. It's either panels or it's an article. If it's plural, this is just really basic. Am I plural? If it's plural, then we would do a filter from the store. Otherwise, we just do a single find method based on the URL that we're transitioning to. And basically, what the resolver here, what the resolver does is when it gets the data back from this API, it sets the ID attribute of everything that I've got in my data store to be the URL of whatever page it is that you're transitioning to. So my article is indexed by the ID. So I can just look it up here using the URL. And then in the store.filter, we're just getting back a filtered set. I'm not actually doing any filtering in here, but if you so wish to, you can filter your result set as appropriate. And this will create a dynamic updating result set. So as new objects are added to your store, this method gets rerun, and it'll update your views automatically, just as you would expect it to do so. Then all we do after that is we just transition straight away to that root name. And I've just got a little catch function here that if something failed during that transition, that we just manually force the browser to redirect to that root. So that pretty much identifies the entire root generation process. Then what you can do is, in your application adapter, I've just hooked up a click event to all anchor tags on the page. And if it's an anchor for a link that's actually on site and it's not linking off to a third-party website, we just transition using the path name, using the URL. And then everything else that I've defined before will kick off, and it runs and it goes. And it took a little while to get this working, but it works really, really well. I'd like, if anybody has any feedback on whether there's other ways to do this, I'm all ears. But this is the only way that I found. So let me just give you a little quick demo. So this website, Gadget Review, not that, has got this application installed on it. And basically what we're going to be doing is, I will show you two versions. So if I just go to gadgetreview.com, we should hopefully get the regular Gadget Review site, which looks like this, pretty standard blog style website. If you go and visit it on a mobile device, namely just specifically the site is only set up to use tablets, but the template works for mobile as well, you'll find that this this template gets displayed instead of this one. And it does pretty much what you would expect. It's a swipeable panel. You can click through to the article page. You can click back, do all the sort of things that you would expect you'd be able to do on there. Now, if I can try, we should find that we should see the routes defined at build time, at runtime. So you can see here we've got a route here, which kind of looks a little funky. You might, I don't know if you can see that. Shall I zoom in? There we go. So we've got this kind of funky route looking thing going on here. It's got this weird name. It's got a controller associated with it. And somewhere, if we click on it, we should get all these details. And we've got a model and a controller that's defined. And this has all been done at runtime. None of this was set up in my app. If you actually want to see what my app routes file looks like, oops, I haven't got this running. We'll see that the only route that I've got defined is the catch-all route. Everything else just magically appears at runtime. Come on. Right. So on my routes file, I'm basically just defining this catch-all route. Can everyone see that? Do I need to make this bigger? Better? Cool. So yeah, this is my catch-all route. This is the only route that's defined in my application source code. I've got an application route that just does some domain-specific stuff. And then we've got our catch-all route. And this is pretty much what was in the slides there. We've got the URL, we create the route name, we check if it exists. If it doesn't, via the resolver, we do the request. We grab the name or grab the type out of the response. We create the new route name. And then we register a new route for that route name with the container. And the rest of this is pretty much as per those slides. And then at the bottom, we just transition to it. So no routes are defined at like develop time. And yeah, it works really well. And I can even hopefully pull it up in here and show you how it works there. Any questions?
We're running a little bit behind, so we'll take one question in the front row.
Okay. So how did you find out how to use container.register? The container object is notorious for me because there's absolutely no documentation on it.
A lot of trial and error, basically. Basically, everything in Ember, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure almost all things in Ember will look in the container for whatever it is you're looking for, and if it doesn't find it there, it falls back to using the name-based lookup to try and find whatever it is.
Somewhat surprisingly, it's actually the opposite of that.
Oh, is it?
But usually that logic works out. Just to give one answer to your question, the reason that the container API is not documented is because it's not considered public API. Now, it's extremely useful. I use it frequently in apps, but it's not. And what it means to be not considered public API is that it may change, as Ember develops and evolves. And so, if you're going to use it, you need to be willing to roll with those changes.
Right.
I remember once I was working with the container lookup because you guys talked about it here. And looking for the documentation, and I was trying to figure out how to make it potentiate a new object every time. The answer was singleton false, but I had to read the source code to find it.
Yes, reading the source code is a good way to go. This is fascinating. Thank you. I'd love to talk more at the bar afterwards. Let's give a round of applause to Ollie. Cool. So let's get Jeff set up. While Jeff gets set up, please rise, stretch. The website that our next speaker built has been cited in Ember conference. I think actually pretty much every Ember conference that I've attended since this site launched. And it's cited typically as an example of the power of Ember as applied to a content site, which is not necessarily the first thing that you think of when you think of Ember. So if I can get your kind attention, I'm very pleased to welcome back a speaker from this team. This is this speaker's first time addressing us, but his colleague Tyler Love gave a talk about a year ago, I think now. So I'm happy to introduce you to Jeff Lang.
So I'm going to talk to you today about Mixins in Ember and a few Mixins that we use at Bustle. Mixins are pretty simple for those of you who haven't been exposed. I kind of boiled it down to these 2 points. They largely revolve around the first point, a way of sharing functionality between Ember objects. And what I mean by that is Mixins are kind of the ability to have properties and methods that you want multiple objects in Ember to share. And it's something that can apply basically across the spectrum for anything that's derived from Ember.object. And the second way is sort of a way to group similar functionality. And I think an aspect of Mixins that kind of gets glossed over is their use being just mixed into one class, but to clean up some of your existing classes. So what that means is if you have a bunch of related properties and methods to gather those into a mixin and then give them to that class, and that kind of like makes your code a little bit more maintainable. You know, you have this functionality in a separate file, and it's potentially usable for other Ember objects. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about inheritance versus composition. So what inheritance is kind of the classic object-oriented way of structuring code, where you have parent and child classes and these big, huge hierarchies of you know, how your data is modeled. And in this case, I kind of started with the idea of a waste receptacle to kind of illustrate the problem of like having these huge hierarchies, where you have a waste receptacle, garbage can, and a dumpster that extend that, and then if you wanted like a round garbage can or a square garbage can, you'd have to extend garbage can further. And the same with dumpster. So the idea with Mixins is that we can sort of take these properties, in this case being something being round or square, and make that into a mixin. And so kind of what's interesting about Ember is that mixins can be added either when you're instantiating an object or when you're defining its class. So in this case, with gcan and dumpy, I'm providing these mixins at runtime when I create them. And the idea here is that you're kind of organizing these traits into more useful modules rather than inheriting and dealing with the problems you have with that. So I'm going to just dive right into how we use mixins at Bustle. And so I'm going to start with a mixin that we have on our router. So Bustle is composed of two Ember applications. We have our CMS and our content site. And so the mixins I talk about are largely going to be on the content site. So it's stuff that your browser would be running if you went to bustle.com. The first is our refer mixin, which is something, like I said, that's mixed into our content apps router. Yeah. What's that? Yeah. All right, so this is a what's called the refer mixin. This is mixed into the router. So what this is used for is detecting. It's pretty simple. It's detecting if a user came to the site from a social network. So we have three methods here: refers, Facebook, Pinterest, and Twitter. Pretty simple. Basically, the way these work is they all reference refer host, which creates an A, sets the href to the document.refer, and then gets the host name out of that. Kind of a pretty bulletproof method of getting your refer host name. So we have those three computed properties, and then refer tracking event, which also relies on that, which is a string that we pass to our internal metrics service to indicate that a visit came from a social network. So the way that we're using this is in our articles model. So this would be any page like Bustle, any article page on bustle.com. And in our after model, so this is after your model has been resolved, we basically handle the refer event tracking, and we also do a page view tracking now. But basically we check if the router, if this is their first page getting into the site, so the router.sequence equals 0, we get the refer tracking event. If that's valid, we send up we run this track event method for Bustle metrics and send up the tracking event. So I guess next I'll talk about how we handle pagination on the content site. So we've got pretty robust and kind of a generic pagination mixin that we use on our controllers, this paginated controller mixin. So this is only going to provide a next page sort of functionality because this is used on our infinite scroll on our section pages and the site home page. So as you're scrolling through, you really only need to get the next page. This one's pretty simple as well. This relies on your controller defining a fetch page method. And what that, so we basically have this fetch next page method within this mixin that gets called within whatever action you have in the controller that you would fetch next page. Could be a scroll event, could be clicking a link or a button or something. So this is going to call the fetch page method, and then it also provides some generic callbacks to handle setting this is loading next page variable, which prevents fetches happening when another one's already in progress. I guess what's also interesting about this is our extract pagination meta method. And so with every response we have for any controller that uses pagination, we expect it to have this meta.pagination object in the response. And so this method is going to pull that from data and set these properties on the controller's model, which you might think that pagination is something that should stay in the controller, but actually applying it to the model, which I'll show with the next mixin, allows it to be cached, and if the user would hit the back button, you still have your pagination information on that model. Then there's just a few more kind of helper methods that are used. Next page, can load next page, which has a bunch of checks if the model's loaded, if we're side loading the model, and with is loading next page if another page fetch is in progress. Yeah, so that's paginated controller. And then the last one, I guess my favorite of the ones I'm going to show off is our cached route mixin. And for this one, I did a little demo to kind of show it off. This one was largely born out of the need, kind of in with our infinite scroll. So, sort of an ideal user experience. I'm sure some of you guys have run into this. You have a list of something on a page. Your users will scroll down, so many pages, and then click on something and hit the back button. Well, in most cases, they're going to end up, at the beginning of the list with none of their paginated data loaded again. And so we wanted to get around that to, basically when you hit the back button, it would work like a traditional, just a better user experience of what users would expect. And that is all of the data you were seeing before loaded in your scroll state restored. So that's what cached route does. It's a mixin you mix into a route, and we're using it basically on any page that we're doing, any sort of like article grid with infinite scrolling usually. So, what's that? Oh, yeah. Is that all good? That's a little bigger. So yeah, this is just a really simple Ember application with, we have an index route, an integers route, and a characters route. I guess I'll show it to you in the browser. So yeah, so we have our index route, integers, and characters. It's a pretty simple app. We have just a list of integers on this page, list of characters with a button that'll just add a character or an integer. So I'll first demonstrate what happens when the model caching is turned off. So here are the two routes, integers route and characters route. You can see the models I'm returning for them is just initially an array of 4 members. The actions are pretty simple. For the integers, I just get the length of the array and add that number onto it. But the problem is, so we're going to add some integers, go over to characters, hit back, and we're back to our original list of integers. So what cache route lets you do is it provides this get cache model for transition method. And the way it works is by using model 4 on the route before calling the actual model method on the route. You can kind of ignore this first line. This is the build of Ember I'm using has query params enabled, and we're not using that in production at Bustle. So that's just to get rid of that parameter, which affects another method. So what we're doing is we initially call this get cache model method, which is kind of where the guts of the Mixin lie. And if it's able to get a cache model and we detect that the transition was from a back or forward button press, then we'll return the cache model and set the property to true. Otherwise, we return null, and as you can see in the route, just as simple or to return whatever model you were originally intending. So this get cache model method gets past params, and the bulk of this code is really just checking if you're using a resource route that all your parameters match the model that you're retrieving. And yeah, and then we have did transition backward or forward, which is again just checking like the sequence on the transition, make sure it was a replace query. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'll go ahead and enable that for both of these models. Okay, so we're on our integers page again. Add some integers to our list, go over to characters, hit the back button, and we're back to our original model that we had before. So you can see this is, really useful in any case where you're going to be manipulating a model on a page, and you need to still maintain that state for the user hitting the back or the forward button. Yeah, so it's really come in handy for us in a lot of places. Any questions? Yeah.
2, 1, 2.
You mentioned that in one of your pagination examples, you pushed the page to the model, right? So it would remember it if you kind of went somewhere and came back to it?
Yeah.
So I just want to say that example and a lot of other stuff that you were showing is going to be way more first class in Ember with a lot of query param stuff. So query params landed on Canary, it's going into beta, and then eventually a release in about like a month and a half later. But so much of that stuff, and also I think you had an example of the cache route, which I believe would kind of do a lookup based on like the serialized params for that route. Wherever you had that delete something query params thing.
Query params, yeah. So I'm using a build of Ember from, I think it's Google's API hosting. But yeah, that basically throws off when it checks those params for resource-based routes. Yeah, down here in get cache transition. So this is going to be called, in your model callback of the route. And the parameters check happens up here in the get cache model. So basically checks if params has the property and then just checks equality of all of them. And if any of them differs, then it returns null. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So this is really similar to So query params depends on this thing called model dependent state. I talked about it at EmberConf. And it's not really totally first class. Like we're making query params work in a way that depends on it, and then eventually, if it's a solid enough concept, release it on its own. But it's exactly that, because it's actually a pretty common thing. But also, I just wanted to say, like, the example of pushing the page into the model is something you're not really gonna have to do anymore if you have your page serialized into the URL as a query param.
Right.
It handles all those cases from forward and back
and
remembering.
Workaround, yeah, for not having query param support, and you know,
it makes perfect sense. I just want to make
where it's not accessible in the URL, but yeah.
Cool.
Cool. Thanks, Alex. Other questions? Got the room for one more question for Jeff.
I was a little confused about what the resource param is, and if just overriding setup controller and checking the model on the controller currently as opposed to what's being passed from the model hook, would that be the same thing?
For the cache route?
Yeah.
Could you repeat your question one more time?
So after all your model hooks resolve, the model is passed to setup controller.
Yeah.
And that sets the content of the controller. And so if comparing the controller's current content to the model that is passed to setup controller, is that the same thing? And I'm just confused about what the params comparison is doing over there on 38.
It happens on resource route, like resource routes when you're using resource versus the route method in your router. So basically what it's doing is it's doing initially like this lookup through model 4 with the route name. And then if it's a resource route, but you have different parameters that you pass into the route, it's going to bail out and run the return the model that you would normally do from the route if your parameters aren't matching up. So does that answer your question?
I think so. I was just so you don't fetch the new model if the model's param matches.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, that method, the get cache model for transition, is going to bail out if your params don't match. In which case, you get the array. For my example.
All right. Let's have a round of applause for Jeff. Thanks. Okay, we have one more talk, and while our speaker's getting set up, I'll tell you a little bit of a story to introduce this talk. I first met some of the team at Vesterly. I don't know how long ago was it now? Maybe 9 months or so, maybe a little bit longer, and at that first meeting, I was sitting down talking with Arthur, as the CTO there, and we were talking about authentication, and I said, you know, I don't think authentication is that hard. Like, we just, you know, roll your own. And I'm not sure that Arthur agreed with me. He was polite, but I think he disagreed. And when I saw what our speaker's about to show you, I realized how wrong I was in that conversation. I think just when you're thinking about really bringing authentication into the realm of where everything else is in Ember, where it's really convention-based, you know where to look for things. It's a common pattern. I think it's super powerful, and that's why I'm really excited to have. There you go. To have my good friend and many-time speaker here at Ember NYC with us tonight, Corey Forsyth.
Thanks. Okay. All right. Can everybody hear me okay? Is it too loud? I feel like this is going to fall off my ear. Okay. Yeah, I'm Corey. Nice to meet you all. I'm going to be talking about authentication with Torii, which is an open source authentication library that Matt and I have been working on for a little while with Vesterly's help. Yeah. But first, about an hour and a half ago, I was stuck in an elevator with 8 other lovely people, and this site was the the best thing I've seen in weeks, and I don't mean the back of Matt's head, but like the time when they actually were prying the door open. So it was hot. I was trying to appear really unappetizing in case it came time to eat people there. So I'm glad we made it out. Yeah, so Matt, the guy in the back of the room, there's my partner. We have a company called 201 Created, and we have these new stickers that if anyone is interested in these, we've got them. We'd be happy to give them out later. And then, yeah, to really get into things, the Vesterly sponsored Matt and I's company a little while ago to sort of take some of the ideas we've been working with around authentication and flesh them out into a library, and they sponsored us to write as an open source library so we can share it with you, which I'm really happy to be able to do today. And yeah, Vesterly is, I've got their little spiel here. They're an app for a content discovery app for professionals to use for lead generation. And they're both at the back of the room there, and I know they'll want to talk to you. They're hiring, so thanks to them for helping sponsor us on this. We appreciate it. Torii is the name of the library. If you don't know, if you're Japanese, Torii means this to you. It's we took it from the name of a bridge, or a type of gate. But if you're an Ember user, hopefully Torii is going to come to mean something different. Yeah, so to get into things, we sort of started, Matt and I have worked on a number of different client apps over the years, or over the past year and a half, I guess, and we very frequently came across the problem of authentication, signing people in, using third-party social services to log in and stuff like that. And we started to build a sort of set of patterns that we would frequently use to encapsulate like the asynchronous nature of that transition, opening pop-ups and sort of reading data from third-party OAuth providers and stuff like that. And Torii was built out of those ideas, and we tried to distill them into a set of primitives that we could all sort of use and iterate on. And so I think before going into this, it's helpful to think about the different ways that we do currently authenticate apps. Sort of started with username and password in web applications. When we worked sort of in the beginning with some Ember folks, we would do what I call a hybrid flow, which is also called like the vomit the current user on the page sort of flow, where your Ember app is, or your server is responsible for serving up the Ember app, and it also happens to maintain your state for you, so it just sort of spurts out the current user into a script tag on the page. I don't know, does anyone sort of use this style where it's like tied deeply? So yeah, I mean, it works, that's fine. But it's not a totally sort of like single page-y way, I think, and Matt and I have been trying to figure out ways that we could do it better. Another option is to separate your single page application from your API and use the concept of a session that is like, treat it sort of more like a first class object that you can transfer back and forth between the two. Am I getting like a feedbacky ring? Is it okay, cool. Sort of in that scenario, you send back, you post back credentials to your API server. It responds with some sort of a session token, and from then on, you include that token. That's your way of managing state in your AJAX requests back to your API. And that works pretty well. That works especially well if you just have like a standard user password. You can fire that off in an AJAX request and hold on to your token, and you're fine. Devise is a great sort of like inspiration for us, and the Rails gem Devise to manage that that sort of scenario for you on the server side. It sort of transparently handles that. You don't have to think about how it is working. You just start interrogating it basically as, is a user logged in, and what is that current user, and you can get on with your programming flow. So that was like an inspiration for Torii. And so yeah, we started thinking about like the general idea of maintaining state in a single page application. And Torii is built around that idea of helping to manage that state as you move through the authentication transitions. And so far I've only talked about user password, but I think we've got, I'll sort of skip ahead and talk about OAuth. So OAuth, and especially third-party OAuth, I mean, is where it starts to get complicated. The traditional flow is, okay, yeah, so this is like traditional OAuth. You go to LinkedIn or something like that, you register your application, LinkedIn gives you an app ID and an app secret, and later when you want to authenticate, have a user be able to authenticate against LinkedIn and use your app, authorize technically against LinkedIn and use your app, you go to a page at LinkedIn's site, their OAuth provider URL, which presents like a form to the user to log in if they're not logged in, and otherwise they have to click a button to say they're going to authorize your app being able to access their data. And after they do that, LinkedIn redirects that page, whatever frame it is, whatever browser tab it's in, to a URL that you have supplied, your redirect URL, and they append a little bit of extra authorization information to it, typically an auth code. This is like the OAuth 2 implicit flow. And so it's up to your server or whatever is consuming that page that loads up that redirect to read off that auth code and then do like a server-side exchange to actually turn it into an access token, which is the whole goal of this. The access token acts as a password for, in fewer terms, that you can use then against that third-party service. So it really feels like OAuth was sort of developed without thinking about single-page applications, because all this redirect stuff really wreaks havoc on the state of your application. If you've got a single-page app like Ember, you don't want to be reloading the page all the time. So the first way we sort of work around that is by loading stuff in a pop-up instead. So you open up this pop-up, the pop-up manages the redirect flow, it bounces around between a bunch of different things, and eventually something has to consume that auth code off of the redirected URL and do something with it. So that was sort of the entire motivating concept that we built Torii around, was like, let's try to take that entire transaction and manage it in a single promise so we can sort of start to reason about it as like an authorization concept. So I'll back up a little bit again. So yeah, before I get too much into how Torii works and what it does, there are a bunch of things we're not trying to be like a completely all-in-one solution like Devise is for Rails, or OmniAuth also for the auth side of Rails, OAuth side. We don't generate any UI. We don't make any assumptions about how you set up your server in terms of like what endpoints are signed in and stuff like that. We are trying to generate a set of primitives that you can use to sort of reason about that and separate the idea of authenticating against a third party or your own first party from the idea of then connecting that account or then signing in with that account or something like that. So you can use the exact same authentication step, whether the end result is to be signing someone in or to be connecting their account or to be using like the Facebook SDK client side or something like that. They all start from the same spot. So we sort of like built Torii around this primitive of a Torii provider, which I will get into here in a second. So I've sort of gone around that. Yeah, there are 4 basic primitives that Torii was sort of built around. Providers, the idea of a pop-up, which is just sort of like a set of code that we use to manage that transition state in a pop-up and reading off those URL parameters, which I mentioned. And then it has very lightweight session management because we wanted that to be available, but it's opt-in, and it's possible and totally useful, I think, still to use Torii without that session part. So if your app already has its concept of what it means to be logged into your backend and how that works, you can just use Torii to authenticate or get authorization from third-party services that provide OAuth or whatever, which allows it to be used by Ember Simple Auth. If you use Ember Simple Auth, Torii can be, I believe it's an authenticator for Ember Simple Auth. And adapters bridge that gap between the Torii provider idea and the actual session. So a provider is, it was named to sort of resemble like the idea of an OAuth provider, and it is generally built to interface with an OAuth provider. So it's responsible for obtaining that sort of proof of authentication from Google or GitHub or Facebook or something like that. And it internally uses the Torii pop-up primitive to sort of manage the flow of opening up that window, and the redirect stuff all happens in that pop-up, and then it reads off the stuff, the extra code from the back, and from your perspective in your application, you are just opening a promise and it is resolving with the data that you need, and you don't have to worry about opening the pop-up or closing it or like managing sort of what is going on inside of it. If you write your own provider, you only need to implement this open method, which we'll sort of get into as I go through it. Here's a screenshot from our demo page. If you click the Facebook OAuth 2 button, it opens up this pop-up, and you sign in and then eventually choose to authorize Torii to the Torii demo website to access your account, and then it redirects you to this redirect URL with auth code. Torii reads that auth code, so it redirects you back to your own app with that auth code appended, and I'll sort of talk about how we handle that seamlessly in a minute. Torii reads back that auth code, closes the pop-up, and returns it back to your calling promise inside your route. And this entire thing just sort of happens in this little simple promise, and that's the core piece that we built Torii around it, and the rest of the stuff is sort of augmenting it to make it more usable in different scenarios. These different OAuth 2 providers are built into Torii, but it's very easy to add your own and extend the ones that are there. Let's see, this is explaining what I was just saying. Okay. Yeah, so the pop-up, the concept of the pop-up, the way it works is your app is going to reload with this auth code appended, and the way Torii works to actually be able to read that URL, capture the data, and know that it needs to actually pop that up into the parent window instead of letting your app boot is by registering an initializer when you include Torii that watches for window.opener, and it watches also for a set of keys that you provided that it's looking for to see in that URL. And if both of those things are true and it finds what it is looking for, it will prevent the app from continuing to boot and instead send a message up to the parent window that I've got this auth data, and Torii is managing the transition on the other side. It closes the pop-up and finishes off that promise for you. Cool, so I've got a little demo showing that. Okay. All right. So let's see. Okay. So here first I'll just show you what's going to happen. So this is using a Torii provider to fetch an auth code from a fake backend that I've sort of created. The backend looks like this. It's a Sinatra app that has a route for a fake OAuth provider. This is like faking out like a Facebook login pop-up. And then when it receives the post from that, it finishes off the redirect back to our Ember app, and it appends the code value and the code key. So it will redirect to something like localhost 4200 / auth code equals some auth code. And then it's Torii's job to finish sort of paying attention to that and finish off the promise, read those data off. So if I do this, here's our fake provider, so it's like Corey, some fake password. And then I'm just adding this here so that we can create our own auth code. Normally, the OAuth provider would be responsible for generating this auth code, but I'm doing it so I can sort of control it. So after I click login, it's going to reload to that redirect URL with the auth code appended, and you'll see this auth code will be appended. And I artificially added a delay of like 1500 milliseconds so we can sort of see it. You'll see the screen pause here. It will appear empty for a second and a half, and that's Torii just waiting to finish that promise. It's called app.defer readiness at that point because it recognizes that there's this auth code in the URL. So there you see that auth code, and in a second it will finish the promise, and then on the other side, the Torii provider has finished its work and it's given us this auth code, and it has told us the name of the service that we use, the provider that we use to auth against. And what this looks like on the Torii side is this. So here we get the Torii object and open our provider. Our provider is passed in through the action in the template. And then by this point right here, when the promise is finished, the entire pop-up flow has finished at this point. The pop-up window is closed and we've read off that service object. And the provider itself looks sort of like this. So yeah, as I mentioned, all providers only need to implement an open method that returns a promise that resolves with some eventual auth data that you're going to use. It reads off the URI that it wants to open and the keys that it wants to look for in the returning URL. And you tell the pop-up to open with those things, and then at the end, this is the data that you get back. It just reads that data off and returns it from the URL. So, like as an example, it's checking that it gets something back called auth code back. And if I change my app here and change the code key to something else, or something else, then when we reload, I accidentally added a 1500 millisecond delay every time it loads. Okay, so now if we do it, it's going to return with a code key of something else. So it won't actually find it in the Torii pop-up opener will not find it, and so it should. Yeah, so it tells us that we get this error. That's the pop-up promise finishing and realizing that it didn't have the thing that it needed. So I'll fix that back. Okay. And then, yeah, I mentioned that we have sort of found that it's very helpful to think about authorization objects as first-class citizens. And so the idea here is that we take the auth code that you gave us and the service name, and we actually send them back to the API, and that's where the exchange process happens. So that's where, in like a real OAuth provider, that's where it would exchange your auth code with a server-side secret token, secret key that it has for an actual access token. And then we capture that as like an actual Ember data model called a service auth. And so now we have this thing that we can sort of reason about. Once we've got a service auth, we are free to use it to log in. Like we can post that to our sessions endpoint. They can use it to do a this.store.createRecord session, or we can use it to actually connect an existing user to that service. But anyway, so we sort of have that object, which is a representation of state on our server of authorization against the third party. Okay. All right. Okay. So yeah, so we've sort of tried deliberately to be very lean, sort of, in what we offer with Torii. The idea is not to, as we said, not to like prescribe an end-to-end solution for everything, but to give you useful primitives that you can use in your own code. So with OAuth, that means this is not a completely server-side solution for the most part, because you are still going to have to implement some sort of server-side exchange. You need to protect that OAuth secret, so it actually has to be on your server side. So it's sort of up to you to figure out how to do that. We haven't built the code for it yet, but Torii would very easily hook into using like devise plus OmniAuth, or even just OmniAuth on your server side to sort of manage finishing off that server exchange. There are some providers, like it's possible with Facebook Connect and Foursquare, and I think there are a few others that will actually give you an access token in the hash of the URL that is returned. It's like a true bearer token. And so for those, you could implement completely client-side authorization. The adapter is the other sort of major Torii primitive. It's used when you decide to use the Torii session. We made it an opt-in thing because it injects a property called session onto all routes, which would easily conflict with an existing app that already had its concept of a session. So it's something that you sort of opt into, and you can configure what that property name is if you use it. If you are adding the Torii session, it is basically just a little bit of a wrapper around using a Torii provider to get an auth code, and then we have a Torii adapter that finishes off whatever needs to be done with that auth code, either like running it through the server to get an access token, or storing like a session token on your Ember data application adapter, your REST adapter, or something like that. That's what the adapter would do. And the session is just like a promise that sort of wraps that whole thing, and it acts as a state machine to give you like an is authenticated property and is opening property, and it will set the is authenticated property to true if whatever your adapter returns, the promise that it returns, resolves instead of rejects. So it just sort of has this idea that as long as everything is resolving, we're calling you authenticated. The adapter is the place where you would be in charge of actually doing something with that authentication, like adding it to your AJAX pre-filter, so you have an authorization header or something like that. So yeah, some examples of what an adapter might do. And the session itself relies on having an adapter. They use the container to match the names of the things you've given them. So if you have an, I think mine was called an OAuth demo Torii provider, it will look up an OAuth demo Torii adapter if you are using the session. Yeah, I mentioned it's a state machine. It adds this is authenticated property and also an is opening property. And then beyond that, it will just proxy whatever properties you ask for to the result of your adapter. Sort of, I think it'll be easier to show rather than to explain. So, so the idea of a sign-in, I'll show you the code first. So the sign-in code looks very similar actually to the fetching of the auth code up above here, and that's sort of by design. Except instead of you opening a provider with Torii, which we did on line 7 there, we're opening a provider with a session. And as I said, the session sort of manages opening that through the provider, then passes that to the adapter, whatever the result of that is, to finish off what it needs to do. And then finally, you'll notice I don't even have anything in this success function here. As long as it is success and not an error, it considers you authenticated. So, 1.5 seconds. Okay, so we'll try signing in with it. Do the same thing, right? Because it's just opening up the same OAuth demo Torii provider here at the first part. And it's going to take the result of this, which is like a service auth object that I showed, pass that into the Torii adapter. The Torii adapter takes care of finishing off whatever it needs to do and sending the information back into the session. So do that. We wait a second while it reads this off the URL. And then finally, yeah, so that's the username I put in. And I'll show you why I have this clown information there in a second. This is what the adapter looks like. So it gets past the result of that, the Torii provider, as I mentioned. We have the idea of an Ember data model called a session, which you just pass it in a service auth. So this is the idea of logging in with that service authentication or authorization object. You pass it into your session endpoint on your API, and you just tell it which previously created authorization you want to use to finish the login. And then it is connected to a user. The session has a user, so I pull off that user after I've saved and created the session, and then I just return this hash, and that's what gets appended to our session, our Torii session. So in the session, it looks like this. So the session has this is opening property that I mentioned, and then the is authenticated property that I mentioned. And aside from that, it just reads off whatever properties you have passed it in your adapter. So if I add this is clown true and reload the page, our session is going to have the current user property in it, but also the is a clown property in it. And you'll see that it says yes. I don't know if you notice, it also says session is opening there because it sort of manages that transition. I'll try it again and sort of show, you can see it now knows that it's opening, and we can do a lot. So like if you were actually logging in with Facebook, you might have a user that got their password wrong 3 or 4 times, and from your app's perspective, it just has this open promise. It's just waiting for it to finish. It doesn't need to know or care what's going on. But eventually, the promise either resolves or it fails. If I close this, it'll fail. And it's no longer opening, and it got this like information telling us what was happening. Okay. As of yesterday afternoon, thanks to Robert Jackson's hard work and helping me and some work that I did with Matt, we can now provide Torii as an Ember add-on. So if you're using latest Ember CLI, it's as simple as installing a Torii NPM module, and at that moment you have Torii already in your app, and you can just start using it. You don't need to do anything else. That's cool. So yeah, Matt and I are sort of, it's been fun to build this and think about what like primitives actually matter, how much work we want to try to do on behalf of people, like the idea of adding, Ember is built around convention over configuration to some degree, and this is not particularly configurable, but there are no real conventions in the way Torii is built other than a few sort of like general primitives that you can use to reason about auth. And so I think maybe an idea would be to sort of like build a little more structure into that to sort of not prescribe how you need to build your app or your backend, but how you can, like more ideas to think about how auth flows through it. Let's see, I think that's all I have. Matt, do you have he's been working like a mad scientist to create a little actual demo. Ember Simple Auth. Oh yeah. So I have these, go ahead. These slides will be put online soon, and yeah, we've actually worked a little bit with the guys who built Ember Simple Auth to make sure that Torii works easily with it. So it would be a way to add additional third-party logins if you're already using Ember Simple Auth. And I'm going to put these slides online. We've got links to Ember Simple Auth. We really like what they're doing. It's not intended to replace that, but to augment it or be like sort of an alternatives idea.
Well, hey, there it is. Okay, so we just wanted to give you a quick demo of actually using Torii for something, so you can see it in something besides, you know, purely theoretical kind of demo usage. So had grand ambitions to use the brand new Nest Firebase API. Ooh. And I'm not sure all the bugs are out of it yet, because it was pretty harrowing. So we didn't quite finish it, but we have the ability to at least read the stuff, and all the Torii stuff is here. So we're going to take this app, and on line 1, can you guys read this? Yeah. So up here, we're going to do that optional like opt-in for Torii that we talked about for the session management, because we're going to use it for session management in this really small, quick app. We're going to load initializers. That's a step that's already done if you're using Ember CLI, so you don't need to think about it. But if we're going to be using this on our own, then we need to actually run that. We're going to boot our application, create 2 little routes of thermostats and structures. Structures are homes. And then we're going to define our provider. So I've got 2 different versions of this. The first one, the idea behind the providers isn't that we write them all for you and we have every provider you want for every service out there. The idea is that we've created something that's like a really simple primitive that you should be able to use to implement your own pretty quickly and easily. And this is a good example of that. To do OAuth with Nest, all I need to do is hit login OAuth 2, give it some attributes there like client ID. I tell the pop-up that I want to extract the variable code from the URL. So we open, I pass it the URL, I pass it what I want to pull off of the URL. It gives me back, if I'm successful, the promise resolves and my auth contains the code. Down here I can pass that code up to a server that we wrote, and all that server does is take the secret for our application and take the code that was sent and send them over to Nest and get back an actual access token. And with that access token, we can make API requests. So that resolves through here. And then a little bit further down, we actually have our adapter because we're doing sessions. And our adapter here is going to be, whoops, sorry, up here. It's going to be really simple. All it really does is just rename access token to auth and then pass through. So now when we want to use this, we call get session, open Nest. These are all conventional, so when you open Nest, what we're looking for is the Nest Torii provider, the name of that class. We open that guy, and if it succeeds, we want to transition. If it fails, we want to show an error message. Torii doesn't give you any method of doing protected routes or anything like that, so if you want to have a certain spot where users can't only get in if they have authentication, you need to put that together, but the idea is that Ember makes this really easy to do anyway. So here's a protected route. You have a before model. You can go ahead and say, if I'm not authenticated, I want to go over to index or do whatever you want to do. And then on our protected routes, we're just making AJAX queries. There's an AJAX helper at the bottom. And we just get some data. So super quick look. This is our Ember Nest Inferno. And we can sign in.
It's my Nest that they're turning on and off.
Oh, no, so. This one's my father's now.
Good, all right.
Yeah. So we can go ahead and sign in, and now that I'm in, I get a whole bunch of things, and I can pop over and look at structures. And this is pretty terse, right? The slightly longer version of it, and it's only slightly longer, is if you wanted to share this with other people, you would probably want to give them a way to configure all those variables, right? The client ID and things like that. So in the aim of making these kind of composable, this is an example of how we've implemented the ones that we have internally so that they can be configured. And if you just inherit from the OAuth 2 provider, this happens to be OAuth 2, you can specify a whole bunch of different attributes that are required for it. And here we've implemented inside of the open, we're still going to the server to fetch the auth code. And if there's one thing with Torii that needs more sussing out, it's just this small step right here, which we'll happily talk about to you at the bar. But yeah, pretty solid, pretty small, quick little thing. And I think that's, yeah, these are just examples of configuration. But I think that's pretty much it. Much thanks to Vesterly for sponsoring open source work in New York City.
Awesome. So let's take one or two questions and then go for drinks. Anybody?
So for the classic example, you're saying dumping the user on the page from the server. Does this strategy now require a second request? So you load your app and then send out another request to some provider? Or how would you manage, getting the app with some authentication already in it using this?
Yeah, like a sort of like a fast boot-ish sort of idea where the app starts up already knowing that it's authenticated.
Right, because then in the example with the user dumped on the page, the app knows you're authenticated and doesn't need to send out another request.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if for pure authentication reasons, you could like store the session token and assume it is good until you know it is not. So like put it in local storage or something like that. You might be able to do the same thing with the entire user app.
Yeah, I mean, at the adapter level, we have the idea is that we only have really two big concepts, right? We have providers and adapters. Adapters are when you deal with sessions. And then we have basically three actions. You can open, you can fetch, which means just restore it from a state that's already there, or you can close it. Inside of the fetch of the adapter, if you wanted to keep in local storage or a cookie on the client side, you could go ahead and look and say, do I have an access token? If I do, just say this is good. If you wanted to embed things on the page, I would rather not build an app that way, but because it means that your app doesn't always boot up in the same state. And I think that makes it complex to work with over time. When you want to change how your app boots up, you need to think about two different kinds of states, and that's kind of messy. But you could do that also inside of the fetch. When you boot up in the fetch, just look on the DOM and say, oh, is there a thing for my current user on the DOM? If there is, create it and return it.
Cool. One more question.
So we have two other kinds of authentication that you didn't cover here in our business. One is where you send somebody an email, and that email contains a URL containing a key that allows a user to log into our app. And the other is where the user has signed on to a third-party app, and that third-party app has a key and a secret that allows it to talk to our API, get a access token, send that to us, and single sign in that user. Do you guys have any thoughts on how you could work with these options?
I mean, yeah, I think again at I think both of them are probably implemented inside of the fetch in Torii. Like Torii wants you to take those things and say that I have several ways of resuming state, and I just want to resume all these different ways of state. And all of those things sound like they're things, except for maybe the token. The second case I'm still a little bit wrapped up on. But the first case where you've just got like a token in the URL that you need to deal with, that's definitely the same kind of thing. There's information in the DOM, and I want to reload state from it. There's information in the URL, I want to reload state from it. Those are all like the same kind of fetch verb. And I think a lot of the work on Torii is not only to try and give us a set of, like a tool to try and deal with some of this stuff, but also a little bit of shared terminology and shared ways to think about them and think about like resuming application states.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Corey. And thank you all for coming out to another Ember NYC. We are going to head over to Lily's, which is on 17th Street between 5th and Broadway. If you've never been out after one of these events, or if this is your first event, please don't feel shy. Come out. It's a very friendly group. There's enough people there, you don't even have to drink if you don't want to. All right? We'll see you soon.